Just want to apologize for the kind of strange lighting. I could tell that I look really yellow here. Um, I switched from Streamlabs to OBS, and so basically, I'm using a different program to record this video. And so it's picking up on my camera a, a bit differently, which really sucks. Um, I was using the program Streamlabs, and for whatever reason, it updated, and now it forces you to log in just to record. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to use OBS. And so here we are. Um, Maybe I could fix the coloring in editing, but who knows? Okay, so this is my review for Dawn of the Dead, the 1978 version. This is definitely, obviously, going to be a longer video. And bear with me, I'm just trying to make sure when I look away in different directions, that's me making sure everything is copacetic and my programs are still recording and this, that, and the third. But so, obviously, and I wrote down quite a bit. And I kind of took a different approach to reviewing this because there's just so much that goes on with the movie itself. And so I don't really like to summarize a movie to review it, but I feel like this is one of those movies you kind of have to, in a way, to, I don't know, in order for me to make the points. Unfortunately, I had to summarize the movie quite a bit. So, once again, please excuse me. Um, Okay, so Dawn of the Dead is one of the movies that has been talked about my entire life and rightfully, to me, deserves all of the praise it gets. I was made aware of the film early in life thanks to my father and actually his interest in zombie movies. We didn't watch the original movie that I remember at all growing up, but I remember him showing my siblings and I the remake from 2004 and some of the comics based off of the original movie. I mean, I grew up really, like, I guess you'd say, in a zombie household. I mean, I remember when my brother turned, I believe, 5 or 6. 5 or 6 years old. One of my first memories was his birthday, and after we celebrated and ate cake, my dad played the first Resident Evil game after. So zombies have definitely been a thing in my life. But I grew up before we had all of the streaming services available to us today in 2026. So if you wanted to watch a movie, this movie too, you had to find a physical copy. Ironically, after the 2004 remake, but before our streaming services of today, I remember it being very hard. It was actually pretty hard to find rentals or anything on the original version of the movie. A lot of that also comes from, you know, that really weird time in between streaming services online and before, and while, stuff like Blockbuster and the brick and mortar stores started dying out, there's this weird in between moratorium where physical copies of movies like the original Dawn of the Dead, in my experience, were legitimately hard to find. I don't know why, but that was a thing. So when I was 13 years old, I got into metal, Metallica being the first metal band for me. And I distinctly remember looking at pictures of Cliff Burton and how, and he was always recalled as being a blast from the past. And people would talk about how Cliff still dressed like he was in the 70s, Metallica, this, fast thrash band in the 80s, had this hippie looking bassist who dressed like as if it was still 1978, right? And I remember a lot of like documentaries and stuff like that would say that about Cliff. He still had this hippie look. And I distinctly remember these pictures of Cliff Burton, who was wearing, I'm not sure if it was like the Master of Puppets era, but I remember him. There are pictures of him wearing this Dawn of the Dead shirt, which, of course, obviously I will post on screen here. But because of this shirt that I would see, Cliff Burton wearing, it made me want to see the original movie even more, which, thinking of how things are today, kind of, if life went a little bit differently, I wonder if Cliff would have liked the remake. Probably not, but anyway, so as a teenager, seeing pictures, Cliff Burton, he had a shirt of the original Dawn of the Dead movie, and it made me want to watch the movie even more. And it wasn't until after high school that I started, to work and I got my own money. And somewhere around 18 or 19 years old, I might have been 19. I distinctly remember about 2012, I was really on a this Amazon kick, where this was before Amazon became like super evil. And so I would buy a lot of like CDs and stuff and, original movies and stuff from Amazon. And about that time period, 2012, was when I bought a physical copy of Dawn of the Dead off of Amazon. I ended up buying the physical version of the theatrical release, and initially that is what I had watched for this review. I busted out the fucking DVD and I watched it and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do that. But then while watching it, I was like, wait, I remember this happening and it's not in this film. What happened? Well, looking it up, of course, I totally forgot, there are various cuts of the movie out there. And so I ended up watching again Dawn of the Dead. I was like, wait, I need to watch this again with all the scenes. And so there's actually, I don't know exactly what year, but there's another version out that came out relatively recently from 2026. Recently to 2026 is what I mean, but like called the complete cut. So I watched that too. I am reviewing pretty much of Dawn of the Dead as possible with pretty much all of the scenes that there potentially are, with the exception of any deleted scenes. So this review is to be as comprehensive as possible about all of the scenes that I believe are possible or have been filmed. So that's what I want to put out there. This is as much as I can potentially watch for this fucking movie. So the theatrical release is 2 hours. And the complete cut or extended versions, with pretty much all of the scenes, amounts to about 2 hours and I believe 34 minutes. So, God, I think I spent like 5 hours, this past weekend, January, whatever. I spent like 5 hours watching fucking Dawn of the Dead, basically, just to make this review. Anyway. So I do want to say, obviously, I can't act like this is a perfect film, but truly, the older I get, I do become more lenient, more lax, and a perfect film doesn't exist. A lot of the movie logic works for a reason because when you make something too realistic, it's not entertaining. So of course there has to be certain imperfections or parts of stupidity because it makes it entertaining to watch. So in some ways that detracts from how quote unquote perfect a movie can be, but I think that Dawn of the Dead is as close as you can get to a perfect movie in the horror genre especially. Now, there are, of course, negative aspects to the movie. One of the main contentions that I did see people talk about, and I do agree with this, is that the only female lead, Fran, is a rather poorly written and weak character. What's interesting while reading some of the lore about it, I think the trivia, like on IMDb, is that the actress for Fran was asked to scream by George Romero, and she was like, "No, I'm not going to scream," because I guess that she wanted to show how strong she could make the character. In my opinion, I don't really feel like that got her anywhere. That's the nice way for me to put it. But I do agree, though, that the character's not a very strong personality. In the theatrical release, Fran appears more weak and less questioning than in the extended cuts. So, what you see in the theaters, what essentially was originally released for the populations to watch, Fran's initial appearance is a lot weaker than what the extended version of the movie portrays her as, which is, does suck. Because if you were able to watch the entire movie with every single scene in there, you would see that Fran is actually pretty smart. Granted, she's still not as strong a character as she could be, but the theatrical release kind of did her wrong in some ways. Granted, there's not much that her character can do as she's pregnant, and logically, it wouldn't make sense to put a pregnant woman in peril with zombies. Granted, in some ways, this didn't stop them later, but whatever. Once the group gets to the mall, Fran feels rather forgotten about, in my opinion, and especially in the theatrical cut. The story seems to focus more on the men, especially once they're in the mall, and to me, it would have been interesting to see more scenes with dialogue about how frightening it would be to bring a baby into the world when it's overrun with zombies. It was never commented on how she was pregnant during an absolute time of death. uh, I never saw anyone comment about Fran's pregnancy in reviews, that's what I mean. In the years that I've ever watched this film, nobody's ever really talked about that aspect. Maybe my personal perception is too brutal on this subject, but wouldn't it be selfish to go through with a pregnancy during a zombie outbreak? One thing I always think about is how the baby wouldn't have any medical care or prenatal appointments. I mean, it could bring a whole new world of fear and hunger to bring a child into the world when the group didn't have much of an evacuation plan from the zombies to begin with. What was also strange was how Fran kept smoking cigarettes despite knowing she was pregnant. She was said to be about 3 or 4 months pregnant. And multiple times you see her fucking smoking away. It was 1978, so it's not like the effects of smoking while pregnant were unknown. But then again, maybe this just goes to show how much she really wanted to keep the baby. Once again, this point is never really talked about, though. The pregnancy is actually kind of more like an afterthought, and Stephen, the father of the baby, often acts like he's not about to become a father. And he acts like he doesn't need to be more careful, like as if he doesn't have two other people that he needs to think about. Once again, this just kind of shows me the pregnancy part of the plot is really not a part of the plot. It's interesting, though, how Peter offers to give her an abortion if she so wants it, claiming that he knew how. I think this is a very interesting piece of dialogue that actually shows the time period that the movie was set in. Abortion had been barely legalized 5 years prior in 1973 with Roe versus Wade, so people like the character Peter definitely still carried that knowledge by the time the movie came out. Of course, Fran denies an abortion, but it makes you wonder, though, what would have happened if she got one. Would she have been all right? Or would she have risked her life, almost dying? I wonder if this was a subtle plot point here. Because Fran always has the risk of dying to the zombies if anything were to happen. Or she could risk dying if the abortion went wrong. Despite Fran's character not getting as much development as the men did, the idea of her being pregnant during such a horrific time drives my contention, in my opinion, about how well the movie can at least bring up subtle yet interesting points, whether they're intentional or not. Another negative contention that I saw in some of the reviews from the 70s when the movie came out was that the original zombie outbreak was never explained. And this is true for the theatrical release. The theatrical release, obviously what people saw in the theaters, does not explain how this outbreak originates. What you see in the theater version, it's just that it's happening, it's here, deal with it. There is like a scene or two that speculates a bit on what caused the outbreak, but these are not included in the theatrical release. So the original audience in 79, well, 78, 79 when the movie was released, the original audiences did not see this. And so granted, I'm not going to jump ahead, but granted, I never thought about this. I never thought about the origin of the outbreak when I watched the movie, because for me, I viewed the film from just an everyday person's perspective, right? Though many of the scenes were cut from the film for time and ratings reasons, the theatrical release kind of makes it seem like it makes it feel like the origin of the outbreak isn't talked about, because honestly, the main characters don't know what was the origin anyway. No one knows the origin of the feces. It doesn't seem too crazy in 2026 that a pandemic would happen and the common civilian wouldn't be told the correct information, let alone the origin of it. But hindsight is 2020, isn't it? So I've watched the theatrical release, the complete cut, and other extended versions, whatever they're called. And I've also seen the movie in 2015 at Housecore Horror in San Antonio, Texas. In 2015, the band Goblin, who did much of the soundtrack to the film, or I guess technically what you would say one part of the soundtrack, because there's technically two. I call it the yellow album and the gray album. So you have the yellow album of the soundtrack. Maybe I'll put a picture on screen. So you have the yellow soundtrack, which has pretty much all the various artists with songs that are played in a lot of the theatrical version. And then there is the gray album, which is what Goblin made. And Goblin's music is used in the theatrical version, but you hear Goblin's music played more in the extended cuts. And of course, at Housecore Horror in 2015, the actual band Goblin was on stage and they would play the music, the background music, alongside the movie, which was a really cool experience. Now, I don't technically know what version of the movie we saw that night, but I know that it was some sort of extended version with pretty much all of the scenes, because I distinctly remember seeing one of the scenes with Joe Pilato later, or Pilato, anyway. But it's really funny, though, in a way. I remember sitting in the dark with the other members of the audience, and this was on the last day of Housecore Horror that year. I remember listening to Goblin play perfectly along with the movie. It was you were able to see the screen and you watched the movie, and the band had a little bit of light on them, but it wasn't like annoyingly so. It didn't distract you from the movie, and they sounded perfect. I mean, they were on key. I loved it. I wish I could see them again. That's how good and fun it was. Personally, I prefer Goblin's tracks over the majority of the movie because of this. Because of seeing them live, I prefer the Goblin soundtrack. I really feel like Goblin made the music to the movie real. I feel like their music makes it a lot more of a horror film, basically. I'll never forget. I I did end up leaving early. I didn't finish the entire film because I had a serious headache that night. And near the end of the movie, I pretty much left early. And I remember some of the staff at the festival were like, "You're already going to leave? You're not going to watch it?" And I remember telling them, I was like, "I've already seen the movie." I've already seen the movie. I know how it ends. And I really needed a Tylenol, and nobody had any. I mean, technically, I don't think legally you could give somebody a Tylenol. Anyway, little did I know that was probably like an early sign of my arthritis. Like, the neck pain I have causes headaches. And so that was probably something I was going through already in 2015. But that's also besides the point. But, it's also funny too, is that, a friend of mine had always wanted to see Goblin live, but they never got a chance to. And shortly after meeting him, I asked him if he ever did, but he said no. And which is really ironic because I was at House Cool Horror 2015, and I saw Goblin. And he always wanted to, and he never did. But probably a year or two before, like 2014 or 2013, him and his friends played at House Core Horror. And I was like, man, that's so funny. If y'all played that year, 2015, you could have seen them, But, life is strange sometimes. But once again, I'll put that right there. That's like a mini review. If you ever get the chance to see Goblin play live, especially for Dawn of the Dead, I highly recommend it. Take that chance. Do it. Do it, because it is fun. It's fun. Okay, but now to the actual movie review part, Okay, let's get this show on the road. Okay, so the movie, of course, starts out in complete chaos. As the news station, which is WGON TV, literally wagon. I mean, come on, wagon TV. Anyway. So the news station is rowdy as the workers are like running all over with chickens with their heads run off, pretty much trying to do broadcasts about the outbreak that's going on. In some versions of the movie, different cuts or whatever, the audio is a little too loud, like the music could be too loud, which made the dialogue hard to hear. But we're able to piece together, though, that the dead are coming back to life, eating the living, and multiplying rapidly due to this. The first character we see is Fran, who is seemingly trying not to lose her shit. I've watched the movie multiple times, and it was not until rewatching for, I don't even know, the 10th plus time in January 2026, as I record this, January 2026, I never realized how George Romero is in the opening shots of the movie. He's sitting in a desk, whatever. One of the producers talking, "I'm so busy, blah, blah, blah." That's George Romero right in front of Fran. And I never noticed that. I never noticed that till now. So the TV station was trying to broadcast information out to the people, but Fran points out that the info is outdated and would send people to their deaths because it would point them to locations that are closed. So she tries to have these taken down, but another producer argues to leave it up for ratings, basically. Already, you get to see how greedy people could be during a time of crisis, one that's literally of life and death. So there's two men arguing live on TV, and I feel like I didn't even write this down, but just saying it now. Another negative point about the movie, I will say, is that you kind of don't really get formal or good introductions to like who is who. You just barely get to pick up on people's names. And so as many times as I've watched this movie, I don't even know the names of those people that are arguing on live on the TV. I guess you don't have to know, but it would make sense to know. So I just wish that characters would have been introduced more properly or in a more just informative way. But anyway, these two dudes are arguing. One is trying to tell the people about the zombies, trying to warn them about it. And what's interesting to me is how he says that the people were to no longer reside in their private residences and had to evacuate to centers deep in the city as the National Guard bursts into people's homes to exterminate the dead. So I've always questioned why people would leave their homes in a zombie invasion to potentially die on the road. This is a trope that has been done over and over again. And I'm not criticizing Dawn of the Dead for this. I'm just saying in general, zombie movies and shows always bring up the idea of traveling to make it through a zombie apocalypse in some capacity. To me, there's no guarantee that there would be room for all these people at the shelters and so-called safe havens. There's no promise that a shelter would have enough food or supply to properly take care of thousands of people at once. To me, it always seems like a bigger risk to brave a zombie invasion on the road than, of course, toughing it out at your own domicile. Granted, this is also how we get the zombie movies and TV shows that we do have. And granted, I mean, Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1 takes place in a house. Just a really big one, right? Of course, being in the city is also completely different from living in the suburbs or in the country. Fran is then taken to the side by her boyfriend, Steven, who tells him to meet her on the roof at the helicopter by 9 p.m. And she tries to be like, no, I have to work. And he's like, oh, come on out to do it. Bleh. And one of her coworkers is like, oh, just go ahead and do it because our job is already done. By midnight, the emergency broadcasts were going to go on anyway. So to me, I'm like, well, that shows how fucked the situation is where the emergency broadcasts were going to come on at midnight. So then the movie cuts to another part of the city where we see some type of hostage situation or standoff happening. In the complete cut, you see Roger, the third main character, hiding below what looked like a brick half wall or something and saying, something. He's like smoking a cigarette and he's like, blah, 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 blah. And what he's saying is being repeated by the negotiator over the megaphone, who says something about a guy named Martinez, and pretty quickly it becomes clear that the building is populated by the Black and Puerto Rican, why did I say it like that? Puerto Rican population, and then a racist cop who, to me, when I was watching the movie, it sounds like they say Willie. But looking it up, I guess the character's named Wooly. But Wooly or Willie it starts being fucking racist. He uses the N-word, and he starts talking about blasting them out of the building. What's interesting is how the racist cop shows signs of racist envy, claiming that he doesn't understand why the people have a better housing situation than he does, which is such a common trope I've heard in real life from actual racists. And I'm not going to get deeper in it because it's YouTube. But this is a common folly of racists, that they're angry with the people of, a different color instead of, and they have this perceived superiority complex because of this. And, you know, the racists are never mad at the system that is rigged as a whole for everyone. They're just mad at the people that look different. So once again, though, this is, to me, a subtle nudge of the social commentary that you would see in George Romero's films. This was also seen in the movie Night of the Living Dead, the original 1968 version. I always liked how Romero's films would touch on the topic of race, which is something that I don't think he originally intended. But thanks to the actor Duane Jones, the original actor for the character Ben in the 1968 movie, Romero would subtly point out the hypocritical logic in many racists' minds. And just some very, very quick lore for Night of the Living Dead. The actor Duane Jones was he insisted on Ben being a pretty much a stronger character than what he was originally written as. Ben was, I believe, just going to be like a trucker, but then he was like, no, he should be, you know, he should just be a stronger character. I don't want to get too deep into it because this review's already going to be long, but because of Duane Jones, Night of the Living Dead has a strong black main character, that main male character, you know? And I think that is one of the reasons why Ken Foree ended up being, you know, the same type of character that we see in this movie. Ken Foree plays Peter, who is a very realistic, kind of like brutal truth type of main character. And of course, you know, he's this strong, tall, fucking black dude that is like, I ain't taking no fucking shit and you're not about to end my life because you're dumb as fuck. One of the reasons why I really like the character Peter. So to me, I think that one of the driving themes with the Dead series, the main three, Night, Dawn, and Day, is how these three films point out how stupid racists are, because it like points out this question of how can you be racist when the dead are walking the streets? You know, the dead aren't racist. They'll eat anybody. They don't care what color you are. They're just going to fucking eat you. So going back to the movie, though, when Wooly, like I said, I believe technically his name is Wooly, the racist cop makes his racist comments, Roger looks flabbergasted. He's like, what the fuck? And especially, you know, as he looks over at a new hire who is like this first day Leon Kennedy kind of type of looking character. And so Roger tells the kid that he'll do fine. And then Martinez, I presume, busts out of the building with his cohort shooting. So the makeup is actually pretty bad here. I don't even want to show a screenshot of it because it's like kind of nearly brown face. And I'm not trying to be like, but I was like, I'm just put it this way, they couldn't do that today. But anyway, so the new hire that Roger was talking to is shot in the head and killed instantly. And you can see his horror because he was just talking to this guy and this kid is immediately dead, never having a chance. He never even got a chance. So the cops gas the apartment building, raiding it, which causes complete pandemonium. And the racist cop loses his fucking mind, busting down doors and shooting innocents, murdering them, presumably just because they're minorities. And this is where the practical effects really start to be seen, as one of the people Wooly murders, I think it's technically the first person he shoots, is a figure that looks like it's made out of wax or clay or something. In the past, I swear that I saw something about what it was made of, but when I looked it up, nowadays in 2026, I couldn't find any information of what that figure was technically made out of. Either way, though, despite the context of this part of the movie, I found this practical effect figure to be very cheesy and laughably bad. It looked really bad. But according to like trivia, this was supposed to be a prop used for what was an alternate ending or maybe an original ending, but there's going to be an alternate ending where Fran and Peter commit suicide. And Peter was, I guess, going to shoot himself, and this was the prop that would have been used for it. But because they decided not to go with the suicide ending, this prop was used for this part of the raid scene, which kind of, now that I just think about it, I realized, did they film the ending before they filmed the raid scene? Not that it matters, but I'm like, I wonder if they did that. So in, the complete cut or extended versions of the movie, we see Roger try to stop Wooly, and he jumps on him, but Wooly throws him off. One cop tells Wooly not to open the door to this room, to this apartment, but he does so anyway. And once he does, he's shot through the chest by another SWAT member standing behind him. And this is the fourth main character, Peter. So he's wearing a mask, so you can't see him at the time. But Peter subtly signals, he turns around and he subtly signals to the other people, you didn't see shit. And he walks away. And this seems to be understood. And I know this is pretty cliche to say, but I thought that this scene was very powerful, actually. I think that many would have found, I assume, people find Wooly's death to be justified, and all the more satisfactory that no one would even report it. Most of all, I think it's very ironic that this racist cop was shot by the type of person that he hated so much. So Roger is helped back up by another young SWAT member, and as Wooly's body is being removed, it's revealed why he was initially told not to open that door to the apartment. Corpses and dismembered body parts are all around it. And here we see the true reason that the SWAT team has been sent to this apartment building, and likely the real reason for the shootout with Martinez. The residents of the apartment building are hoarding their living dead in there and potentially other rooms of the building. So this is what was so quickly discussed, actually. Going back, watching the movie, twice within the same weekend. This is what was so quickly discussed at the beginning of the film with that news broadcast. The people were to evacuate their private residences and go to the shelters while the National Guard would collect the dead. But it's so clear by this SWAT raid that things never went smoothly. They didn't go smoothly at all. And people weren't doing as they were supposed to. Clearly, SWAT was forcing these people out and not actually helping them. So I wonder, though, and I know I'm getting into the weeds with this, but I wonder if Wooly and really the other members of the SWAT team even knew this. I wonder if Wooly himself was completely naive to the undead theme. I also wonder if the racist context was supposed to be a way for the movie to trick prejudiced watchers. At least initially when the movie first came out, Would a racist person viewing the film think that Wooly's actions were justified? Many racists believe that minorities are just criminals. So I wonder if they were supposed to think that the raid might have had something to do with drugs, only of course to be shocked with the zombie reveal. It's the little parts like that which make you think about how much time and nuance truly went into the writing of the film. George Romero put a lot of effort into this. To put it very simply, there is a lot of effort put into this film, just in the writing alone. So, in the apartment filled with zombies, the young guy that helped Roger back up is nearly bitten because he's so shocked as to what's happening. And once again, that's why I'd question, did the SWAT team even know what they were doing this raid for? So another zombie comes into the room, and Roger and another cop fight this one off. And the young kid, who was like really scared and nervous, nearly getting bit, he ends up shooting the first zombie, and after this, he kills himself. And Roger sees this and he's horrified because, here he is seeing yet another young kid fucking killing himself during this dying during this raid. So Roger escapes to the basement, nearly throwing up, and then he's told that he's not alone. And here we see the formal reveal of the fourth main character, Peter, and the man that shot Wooly. So he asks, you was in Wooly's unit, wasn't you? And Roger replies, I didn't see anything. I didn't see how he died. And, there's this mutual understanding that he wasn't going to say anything, if any questions were ever asked. And I guess, in a way, looking back at the film, I guess the characters, were written with the expectation that life was going to go back to normal eventually, that, the zombie thing would fade out potentially. I wonder if Peter was thinking, while he was down there in the basement, I wonder if Peter was thinking what he would do in case he was taken to court for murder. But then again, Wooly was the one that murdered people first. So it's kind of like, did Peter really commit murder? But this isn't even really thought about because we quickly move into what the actual point of the movie is. So the two sit and chat, smoking when this one-legged priest appears. And I always think about this part of the film, and this is so stupid, but whenever somebody is in my way or my cats are blocking the doorway, I'll always think, let me pass, in this guy's voice, because this priest is like, let me pass, because he is just trying to get to, I don't know why is he in the basement, but he's supposed to get to the 7th floor to his sister's room. But he says some things that's kind of foreshadowing, and we got to stop the killing, or the killing, blah 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 blah. But what's really interesting is how the priest tells them that the people of the apartment building were leaving their dead in the basement. The very same basement that they're in right now. So Peter and Roger, in an extended clip or whatever scene, you see them actually go to this part of the basement. Anyway. You see them go to this part of the basement in particular, and it's understood that Peter wants, or it's he feels like he has to shoot the zombies in an extended version of the scene. But either way, you see Peter start to shoot these zombies that are held up in this cage. It's he wants to put them out of their misery. So he looks horrified as he sees some of the dead eating body parts, and then others that are actually kicking around while wrapped up in sheets, still moving. So Peter unloads, and then he has to replace his ammo, but it looks like he doesn't even want to do it. You can even see tears running down his face. So then Roger comes in and he finishes the job. And then right after that, a National Guardsman busts through this small laundry chute or whatever, and he's shocked at the bodies. Now, what's really interesting is that in the complete cut or an extended version of the film, the music plays here it's still sad and gloomy. But in the theatrical version of the film, when the National Guardsman busts through this chute, it becomes happy, as if, oh my God, finally salvation or something. Just a small little difference between these cuts of the movies. But either way, he asks if they're all right. Peter reluctantly says yes. And then Roger asks why the people do this. Why did they leave their dead here, instead of doing what they're supposed to. And Peter tells him that they still believe in respect for the dead. And I agree. I mean, do I agree with having them in the cages? No. But I agree in having respect for the dead. So the movie goes back to Stephen and Fran, who are going to get fuel for the helicopter. So they're waiting on Roger, who's supposed to show up, and I guess technically he's running late or something. And so while they're fueling up, some ruffians try to scare them. And I didn't write this down, but you in this scene, this extended scene, this is not in the theatrical version. This is in like a complete cut extended version of the movie. You see the ruffians that try to, scare, potentially rob Stephen and Fran. And in this scene, you see how naive the couple really is, because these ruffians are obviously not real cops, but they're dressed up like cops. But they're dumb, and they literally look like fucking like bikers or something, They obviously look like people that have been to jail a few times. And it's never even brought up in this scene that Fran or Steven recognizes that they're fake cops. They just believe it. So anyway, one of these people is Joe Pilato, who would go on to have one of the lead roles in another Romero film playing Captain Rhodes in 1985's Day of the Dead. Speaking of, hey, can you see this? Come on, bub. Anyway, I'm wearing my Day of the Dead shirt. So Captain Rhodes is played by Joe Pilato, who in the extended version of Dawn of the Dead is one of these people that is acting like they might rob Stephen. But Pilato and his fake cops see a patrol car show up, and this car is, of course, Roger, who brought Peter with him, because Peter agreed to escape the city with Roger. So, this dialogue, like I said, is not in the theatrical release at all, but it's very funny because in this scene, Pilato's fake cop character is trying to bargain for a little bit, not to get into like some sort of shootout with Roger. And basically they decide, oh yeah, we'll just take this boat, because they had this idea of going on a fucking boat. So before they leave in the helicopter, one of the fake policemen, this dopey fake dude, asks if they have any cigarettes. Now, this scene is in the theatrical release, but the way the theatrical release is edited, you don't know that this person asking for cigarettes is a fake cop. You just think like this is some dopey looking rookie. So I don't know why they would leave that scene in, but then not the other parts to this. It's just a weird choice there. So he asks, and they're like, no, we don't have any cigarettes. And then he claims that they're taking a boat down the river to the island. And Steven's like, what island? The fucking moron's like, any island. It's like, they're about to die. They're gonna fucking die. They don't even know where they're going. They're going to fucking die. So anyway, they have no destination, greatly unprepared. And you never hear about them ever again. I think in a way, this is sort of referenced, or there's a nod to this in the remake with how the 2004 movie ends. But, the funniest part, though, about this scene is that, at least in the extended cut, I can't remember if this is in the theatrical version of 1978's movie, that after Roger's like, no, I don't have any cigarettes, they get into the helicopter, they're about to fly off, and you see Fran and Roger lighting up their own individual cigarettes. They just obviously didn't want to share it with the guy. Which, rightfully so, since his crew people just tried to rob them. Whatever. So, in the extended version of the movie, there's a small part of the scene where, in the helicopter, Peter asks if they're leaving anybody behind. Fran says an ex-husband. Roger says an ex-wife. Peter says that he's leaving behind some brothers, and then Fran asks if they're real brothers or street brothers, and Peter says both. And it makes me wonder, and this part really made me wonder if any of the people in the apartment building were people that Peter knew, you know? Maybe that's why it was so hard seeing all those people dead but alive, in the basement. So the helicopter flies over the countryside where they see the military out in trucks and rednecks doing target practice on roaming zombies, and then a mixture of the two drinking somewhere in between, which I could definitely tell you fucking rednecks would love to shoot some zombies. Anyway, so the gang land for fuel, and Peter checks out a building, what looks like, some sort of motel. And we see writings on the wall from people that have passed through, telling loved ones where they went. And this is absolutely surely an influence from the graffiti we see in the save rooms for the game Left 4 Dead. Once again, you really see, watching this movie, especially nearly 50 years after it was released, you really see how much it influenced games, movies, books, just culture afterwards. You can so easily see it now, So while getting fuel, Steven is attacked by a zombie, but Fran does nothing as a zombie is coming towards her. But the scene itself is so silly and stupid because to me, it's like they were trying to show how she was caught between a rock and a hard place, but she just looks stupid and useless as a character. Steven thankfully finally grabs a mallet that he dropped, and he sort of bashes the zombie in the head. But then he gets up and he bumps into or slightly pushes another zombie. But in doing this, he nearly twirls in the air like a fucking ballerina. And I won't lie, just sometimes I would just get secondhand embarrassment from how useless of a character, just useless of a protector that Steven was at times. I mean, for a man that got this woman pregnant and now there's a zombie apocalypse, I mean, they're fucked. That's the best way, the nicest way for me to put it. So while fueling up, the actual person at the helicopter was Roger, and the zombie comes near him. A zombie with this noticeably big head comes up, and thankfully he gets scalped by the helicopter blades, which apparently, reading about the lore, the blades were added in post-edit cuts. But this scene to me is, I think, probably the most memorable zombie death in the entire movie. I don't know if anything like this was ever done in a movie like this before. The thing is, the crazy thing, well, maybe for some people, people actually die like that in real life through helicopter blades, So Peter, going back to him, he's seen at the motel, and in what's probably another movie first, he has to shoot child zombies. A common piece of movie lore here is that Ken Foree, who played Peter, had no idea that there would be kids as zombies. So apparently his reaction to this scene was genuine. He didn't know, it's a real reaction. This was surely upsetting to many people, and you never see kids as zombies in movies, I swear, after this. And probably for legal reasons. I mean, I know that there's laws and stuff about depictions of violence against children, especially in video games, But it does bring up a good point, though, that realistically, in a zombie apocalypse, even children would be infected too. I mean, that's a real point, So we do see another zombie that tries to come in and munch on Peter, who I wonder if is the inspiration to the poster art. You never really see the exact zombie in the movie that At least I don't think you do, that you typically see, on the Dawn of the Dead ads and what was on Cliff Burton's shirt. The closest looking zombie to me would be the one that's in this scene right after the children zombies are shot. So eventually, though, the crew makes it to the infamous mall and sets up shop there. Pun sort of intended. Not long after, Peter and Roger decide to explore the mall while Steven and Fran stay upstairs. Until Steven decides that he wants to once again prove himself as a man. This is how it came off to me. And of course, he gets nearly killed in the fucking utility room. The four all actually end up having a close encounter with the zombies, and afterwards, in the extended cuts of the movie, Steven has the audacity to fucking say they did a good job. I was actually pretty shocked. Like, this dude is a fucking moron. He really is. Because the character claimed that people just didn't do what they were supposed to. Like the stuff that was in the broadcasts and everything. People just, if they just did what was in the broadcast, everything would have went so well. No wonder it got bad. People just didn't do what they were supposed to. But it's very clear that Peter sees through this. And he asks Steven if he'd be ready to blow Fran's head off if she became one of the zombies. And after Peter asks Steven this, Steven fucking shuts up. I was like, yeah, dude, shut the fuck up. You're an idiot. Because Peter was like, you almost fucking died. We all almost fucking died. What are you talking about? And that's one of the reasons why I really liked Peter's character, because he was the necessary reality check that honestly Steven and Fran and even Roger at times needed. And it's right after the scene that it's revealed that Fran is pregnant. And interestingly, the only one to suggest finding a doctor is Roger. Peter is, of course, Peter interestingly says that they can deal with it. But looking back, I'm not sure if he means deal with it just in the sense of an abortion, or deal with it also as in we can deal with the pregnancy, But of course, he offers to give Fran an abortion and they refuse. And in the extended cuts of the movie, Steven goes back to the room that he and Fran are staying in, and Fran starts complaining, and she's like, she says that she wanted to go to Canada, just taking what they needed and leaving, which is a good point. You're like, okay, yeah, they don't need to just hoard or lord over whatever is left in the mall. But Steven points out, on the contrary, that they would have to land multiple times just for fuel, and they would likely have trouble with the authorities, which are also valid points. And actually, I agreed with Steven on that part, because I'm just like, to me, I think there's no guarantee that going to Canada would have been better. At this point of the infection, or the outbreak, I'll say, we have no idea what Canada is going through. There's no guarantee Canada wouldn't have zombies at that point, I mean, and they're supposed to be in Pennsylvania. So, and it does say, if we go back a little bit, you could see Monroeville in that scene with the rednecks on, I believe, like the fire trucks. So it's kind of maybe slightly pointed out like they are in Monroeville. It's not just filmed there, but it's also like placed in Monroeville, Pennsylvania. So my point is that that's Pennsylvania, which isn't that far from Canada. So why did Fran think they would be safe up there? It's kind of stuff like, I guess not necessarily a pipe dream, but to me, once again, it's like you're too naive. You're so naive to think that you wouldn't get fucked up there too. Okay? And this is here in the extended version of the movie, that the next day we see this scene where Fran is watching the news. And this is the extra scene where we're informed that the outbreak is likely due to a virus. Fran ends up having some extra dialogue around here, and she says that she wants to be included. Granted, this part's in the original, but she says that she wants to be included in group decisions and she doesn't want to be left defenseless again. Because that first day they even got to the mall, she almost got bitten by this Buddhist zombie, which Buddhist zombie sounds kind of like a contradiction, doesn't it? But anyway, and those are good points. She shouldn't have been left without any weapon or anything. Now, ironically, when she says that she doesn't want to be left defenseless, like she should have a gun too, for whatever reason, this seems to bother Flyboy. Like, he's like offended, and he like slams his gun and ammo down, like, ugh, here. What the fuck you want, dude? You want her to die? It's just shit like that makes me go like, was this written on purpose for him to seem so stupid? Like, was that intentional? Anyway, Roger and Peter then take some trucks, which in the extended cut, you actually see them like drive and try to block the other entrances to the mall. Which, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but I think that the character should have done certain things to block off entrances and exits as soon as they got there, instead of kind of waiting a bit too long. But I guess that's also part of the plot to the movie too, and especially how it ends. But during this scene process, they get the trucks, and Roger nearly gets killed in the process multiple times. And we end up hearing one of Roger's most infamous lines in the movie. "We got this! We got this by the ass!" But Roger's hubris nearly gets him eaten again, like right after he says this. Thankfully, Fran, who in the extended cut is on the roof with the gun that Steven slammed down and gave her. Fran is on the roof and she starts to shoot at some of the zombies, getting some of them. But Roger still ends up getting bit anyway, on his arm and leg, actually. And it was actually really funny to me seeing Ken Foray's reaction when Roger gets bit is so funny. Because Roger's like, oh, because he got bit. And Ken Foray's just like, damn. Damn. Anyway, and I shouldn't laugh because like, no, not Roger. Because I really did like Roger as a character. I mean, especially compared to Steven, it's like, if there was a character that should have died off first, I mean, it should have been Steven, in my opinion. But I know for the sake of the plot, it had to be Roger. So Roger quickly begins to deteriorate, and Steven picks up some of the slack as pretty much Peter's right-hand man. So they go to the weapon shop, and Peter and Steven stock up, which is seen more in the extended version of the film. And interestingly, once again, according to movie lore, this store was actually not in the mall at all that they recorded at. This was a separate location entirely. In fact, quite a few places that you see in the movie were not actually in this mall, including the apartment, I guess you would say, that they make out of the top floor. I call it the mall apartment, where the characters stay at in the mall, which is supposed to be like the top roof area, was actually just like another set built at Romero's film studio at the time that he owned. But anyway, the four go out into the mall, the four of them, but because of his leg, Roger is in this wheelbarrow. And they're there to get supplies, I suppose, but they nearly die again, and Roger's infected leg ends up being gored by another zombie. And what is, like one of the most brutal looking things that I hate seeing. I personally cannot stand seeing this part of the movie. That scene is so gross because the idea of a wound being reopened is so nasty to me. Anyway, so they get into this car so that they can drive around the mall and like lock the other doors from the inside, like the other entrances and exits. And once again, this is seen in extra scenes of the film. You don't see this in the theatrical release. They only have like a passing piece of dialogue in another scene, I believe late in the movie, saying that they did this. But with the extra scenes, we actually see them do this, and we get some more background into the characters. One of the extra scenes that we get during this area of the movie is that the characters dumped the dead body. So it was Peter and Steven. They took the dead zombies, gathered them up, and put them in the fridge cooler to what I assume was like a restaurant in the mall. Now, this is partially seen in the theatrical cut too. You see them putting the bodies in the cooler, but with the extended scenes, we see them actually dump the bodies into this cooler that has perfectly fine food still in it. And I thought, what a fucking waste. Why are you putting dead bodies in this cooler, this walk-in fridge that had fresh food still in it? You see like tomatoes and an uncooked rack of ribs. And I'm like, what the fuck are these people doing? Why are you putting the zombie flesh next to the ribs? Anyway, what also doesn't make sense is how they expect the cooler to be good enough storage. I mean, how long did they expect to stay in the mall? Seriously. I mean, the bodies would still rot. You know, wouldn't they still stink? It would just rot at a slower rate. I mean, not trying to sound like a cannibal, but, you know, food still goes bad in the fridge too. So why wouldn't the zombie still go bad, right? You know, it just, certain things like that, it's like, oh, that's funny, I guess. It's funny they did that, but they didn't think very far ahead, I guess is the only way to put that. So after a shopping spree, the gang gathers in front of a JCPenney's, which I don't know if this was intentional or not, but you see a lot of shots in the film and a lot of items in the movie that are from Penny's or JCPenney's. You know, you see it different ways. There's this small little TV that they bring into their mall apartment, and it says JCPenney's on the TV. And then various shots around the mall are in front of, or it shows, you know, the storefront to Penny's, which, as another just historical tidbit out there, is that back in the day, I guess JCPenney's would go by JCPenney's, but then also Penny's. And I never understood this. I don't know, just regional variants, I guess? I'm not really sure. I grew up with it being called JCPenney's. So it really shocks me when I've met people that they grew up and it was just called Penny's. And I was like, anyway, we're getting off point here. So after this shopping spree, the gang gets in front of a JCPenney's. And this is where Ken Foree says the famous line, you know, when there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Something that Peter says was told to him by his grandfather, a potentially voodoo priest. Peter says that his grandfather was a priest in Trinidad, but I'm not sure if it's implied that he was supposed to be a voodoo priest or not. You know, if so, that's just a very subtle way of putting it in there. But this line makes me wonder, though, if this is what the character Peter thought at the beginning of the film. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Is that what Peter thought when he shot those people in the apartment? Well, the zombies. Makes you wonder. But because of being bit, the movie moves forward to where Roger starts deteriorating once again rapidly. Very, very rapidly. And though somewhat delirious, he ends up asking Peter to shoot him when he dies so that he doesn't become one of them. And not long after this, actually, Roger does pass. And when he comes back, he looks like some sort of moldy mushroom. He just does. He looks moldy. But Peter ends Rogers' misery. So they bury him in what is a small ground area the small like ground area around the fountain in the mall, which once again struck me as odd. Like, would he even decompose there? You know? But granted, it's kind of like, where else would you put him? You know, you either bury him in the fountain section and maybe he stinks up the place or not, or he just never decomposes. He might just mummify. Or you take his body and you throw it off the roof. Like, what do you do? Literally. Do you throw him in the cooler? And directly after that, the next scene is of Steven and Fran, who are at the restaurant. Oh, I just realized that's nasty. Steven and Fran are at a restaurant, and I guess Peter must have cooked for them. And while sitting down eating, Steve basically proposes. He proposes marriage to Fran. And I just realized, is this the same fucking restaurant that they dumped those zombie bodies in? Oh, shit! Anyway, I don't think anyone thought about that until now. But seeing the ring, Fran is shocked, but she rejects him, saying that it wouldn't be real. And you can see how this, of course, hurts Steven, that she rejects his marriage proposal. And honestly, I thought this was stupid. And not because, no, she should have said yes. It's more like, I think the reason why she said no was dumb. Fran rejects him because she says it wouldn't be real. Because to me, this seems to point out that Fran assumes life is going to go back to normal. Eventually. You know, eventually the zombie apocalypse will end, and then we can go to the courthouse and get married. Just wait. Just wait. But it's like, when would that be? 5 fucking years from now? You know, half the world is dead, but we could finally go to the courthouse, Steven. That's stupid as fuck. You know, what would make the marriage real at a time when the population was dying and becoming fucking zombies? Hello? Shit. Sorry, I'm not even getting mad. The idea behind it is stupid. It wouldn't make it real. It wouldn't be real. What makes it real? I hate to sound like such a Gen X fucking person, but it's a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper. You know, if you have that bond with somebody and you want to marry them, do you literally have to have a fucking courthouse to make it real? Isn't the connection with that person real enough? Anyway, time passes and Fran becomes more visibly pregnant. Extra scenes in the movie show that the part of the mall that they've been living in has become more lived in and decorated, though tensions seem to run between Fran and Steven more, sometimes nearly seeming like they don't even actually like each other. Now, I guess you could argue, you know, the only other person they have in their group is Peter, you know, but I mean, it was just interesting. To see how their dynamic pretty much sort of deteriorated with these extra scenes. So at dinner, Fran exclaims, "What have we done to ourselves?" Implying that what she says earlier in the movie, like right after the abortion thing. Because earlier in the movie, Fran says that the mall this is just a prison too. And so when she's like, "What have we done to ourselves?" It's like implying that what she said about the mall being a prison is correct. Once again, I couldn't help but roll my eyes at her. Like, it's stuff like this that makes me roll my eyes at the character. Like, this is why I think the character is weak. You know, she's the only female lead, but anytime she brings up a point, half the time it's fucking dumb. Sorry. And just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I have to like her either. I mean, during a life or death situation, what the fuck is she looking for? You're still alive, bitch. Fuck. Shit. After this scene, directly after this scene, we see the scene that is in both the theatrical and extended cuts of Fran mastering the helicopter with Steven, which pretty much begins the ending of the film. Tom Savini and his group of evil biker raiders decide that they want stuff from the mall and they want to run amok inside it. What's very interesting is that when Tom Savini and his, I don't know, secondhand man see Fran land the helicopter, the guy that is with Tom Savini looks like the fucking negotiator at the beginning of the film with Roger. I don't know if this is the same dude, but they look very much alike. So anyway, Tom Savini and his gang of bikers raid the mall. Essentially, ironically, there was like this huge ass fucking gate that was never completely locked, and that's how they ended up getting in. But you see them run amok, they go crazy, they throw some pies in the zombies' faces, steal jewelry from a zombie, and ride around in their motorcycles. In extended cuts of the film, the song that plays here is Zarazatom by Goblin, which I think fits more perfectly with this sequence. The theatrical version uses a song from like the Yellow album. They don't use a Goblin track, which, anyway, I think that the song Torta in the Faccia, or Torta in the Faccia, which is by Goblin, Pie in the Face, would have been good for those parts of the movie where you see the zombies getting, pied. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Steven feels territorial about the mall and he wants to fight for it. Thankfully, he gets the idea to fucking retreat, and though Peter still has to escape after being shot at by the bikers. Fortunately, Steven gets shot, though, when he retreats into the elevator shaft. So something I don't completely understand, I think it's the elevator shaft setting location itself. That shaft that they quote-unquote filmed in was not actually part of the mall. The elevator shaft that you see in the movie, I guess, was another off-film location that might have been made just for the movie. I say that because the elevator itself apparently was in the mall. I've seen a review by James Rolfe, the AVGN guy, who's many years in the past went to the Monroeville Mall, and he was like, you wouldn't even realize this was the same mall in general. The mall is so different. But so after this, though, Tom Savini's character is shot by Peter and he dies, and the other bikers try to escape. So here we see the infamous sombrero-wearing biker trying to get his fucking blood pressure taken for whatever reason, and of course he's mauled by zombies. This is one of the funniest deaths in the film, because it's like, you stupid fucking idiot, you could have literally lived if you didn't. Why? Just why? So anytime I go to a store like, I don't know, Walmart or Target or any of those places, ever since I have watched this movie and I go to a store that has that blood pressure thing, I think of that scene from the film, literally. And that's why I don't ever do that thing. Not that I've ever wanted to, or needed to. And interestingly enough, when I went through the newspaper archives, there was a little snippet about this character from an article from 1978, where the author of this article was talking about how, the extras were gathered for the film. And this one article in particular, I guess, was talking about the biker scene. And so the character for the blood pressure scene was the person, I'll say, was wearing, of course, the sombrero, but he was also wearing a red band around his arm with a certain party symbol on it. Now, I don't believe we see this insignia in any scene in the movie at all, thankfully. But in the 1978 article, the author wrote that their thoughts initially were, some people will wear anything. Granted, apparently the extras for the biker scene showed up to the film having been told to wear, I guess, whatever they wanted. The idea was to show up in a, I don't know, just to show up looking like a ragamuffin, looking, like some sort of raider. And it wasn't because that's what that person believed in. It was just to add to the idea of being, a crazy raider, But that person was not, I don't think, related to the actual group of bikers. That there was an actual group of bikers that were part of the film. Some of the people that were in the biker scene were part of an actual group called the Pagans. Pagans or something, but the Pagans. So, back to the movie. Steven is then supposed to meet up with Peter, but he is mauled by zombies as his feet dangle in the lift, the elevator. Complete goner, Steven quickly converts into a zombie, which I didn't even realize it till I started writing this review, that this is very interesting to me, because Roger took a few days to turn into a zombie, where Steven did so in a few hours. Granted, I assume that because he was literally mauled by multiple zombies, he probably actually died quickly. The zombies ate the fuck out of him and he probably died, whereas Roger was still alive for a few days. But interesting point here, Steven converts. Steven turns into a zombie much faster than Roger does. Zombie Steven, who I'll definitely say the actor for Steven did a fantastic job looking like a fucking zombie when Steven turns into one. But zombie Steven and his cohort of undead friends take over the mall apartment, basically, and Peter tells Fran to escape. But he's like, I'm not coming with you, I don't want to go. I really don't. So Peter contemplates suicide, and in the, I guess you'll say, typical ending of the film, the zombie starts to climb up to the roof. They start trying to even get to Fran. And last minute, when dawn hits, as you see in the extended cuts of the film, Peter, dawn literally hits, and Peter decides that he wants to live. And he climbs up, he fights off the zombies miraculously, and he climbs into the helicopter with Fran, and then they fly away to God knows where, to an uncertain future. Overall, I think that this is an essential movie for every horror fan to see. I would say for every person that likes movies, they should watch this movie, because I think that there are many other movies that have been influenced by George Romero that aren't necessarily in the horror genre. But I'll say in general, you cannot watch horror movies without watching Dawn of the Dead. The influence this film has had on pop culture, just culture in general, is too great to ignore. And this isn't me just like blowing smoke up George Romero's ass, You can see how Dawn of the Dead inspired other zombie movies, zombie video games, and zombie books. There actually was a novelization of the film, though I've never seen this in person anywhere. I don't even know where you would find that. I mean, in 2026, you would have to buy that online if it even exists anywhere. But there would not be games like Left 4 Dead or Dead Rising, which is based in a mall, without this movie. I believe in many ways that this movie inspired parts of the Resident Evil series. I mean, at one point they wanted Romero to make one of the Resident Evil movies, but the fucking producer was whatever. The Resident Evil people were stupid enough to not go with Romero. I'll put it that way. But they were obviously, the Resident Evil franchise, I believe, was very obviously influenced by Dawn of the Dead. In fact, to me, this is especially prevalent in Resident Evil 2, because if you look at Leon Kennedy, Yes, he was a cop, but his outfit is very, very similar to what Roger wears in the 1978 movie. And I think in some ways, the idea of Roger talking to a new hire, obviously a new kid for the SWAT raid, who probably was literally on his first day and then fucking dies, I feel like that is some sort of inspiration to Leon Kennedy. I really do. Yes, there are many points to this movie that don't make sense. But like I said before, you kind of have to have movie logic for something like this to even be made. The characters suffer because of their own hubris at times. Roger, if he was more careful, he could have actually lived. Stephen, to me, he's not the typical character you would think of as arrogant, but when you start thinking about the idea of longevity, he definitely suffered from hubris too. I still think, though, with all the flaws and, some of the characters I didn't really care for, I still believe this is a great movie. I really do. Because the concept itself is so fascinating. Obviously, the idea of holding out in a mall is what has inspired generations to come. And I think maybe sometimes we need to think of things in a way like that. Not necessarily how good the movie is, all within itself, the plot, the storyline, the actors. Sometimes you kind of also have to think, what does this inspire? What does this arouse? This has inspired a lot, and this is a very important film. Obviously, its predecessor, Night of the Living Dead, was incredibly important too. I believe it is part of the archives in the Library of Congress. So, overall, a fantastic movie that has, to me, a lot of potential to still inspire many people in the generations after it, My favorite character, I think obviously my favorite character was Peter, just because he was so realistic and the only character of the four to actually have the foresight to think ahead. Fran and Steven, the more I watched the movie, especially watching the extended cuts and scenes of the film, to me, they showed themselves to be too naive. In a normal situation, a normal civilization, I'll say like this, without a zombie outbreak, Fran and Steven would be perfectly fine. They would have just, had their baby and lived their way, probably would have went to Disney World every summer, But in a time of crisis, they proved themselves to be too naive and in a way too trusting, because right before the Tom Savini and his group of bikers raid the mall, Fran actually believes them when they said they only had 3 people. Once again, without Peter, Fran and Steven would have quickly died. I feel like the other characters definitely owed Peter their lives, And unfortunately, Roger ended up dying because he got too reckless. Without Peter, the other characters would have died because they had really no foresight at all. Before I forget, I will say, I'm not sure if I'll show this, but damn, this is a long review. I was inspired enough by this movie to even create art of it myself. Hopefully I could find it. Hopefully I could find the pictures on my computer. But, back in 2015, 2016 era, I had, drew some art for drew art that was inspired by the soundtracks of the film. I'm a huge fan of it. I really love Dawn of the Dead. I really do. So truly, despite its flaws, I give this movie a 5 out of 5. I highly, highly recommend it. And thankfully, in 2026, you don't have to buy a physical copy just to watch it. There are, I'm not going to say where, but if you look, you can very, very easily find the extended, full 2.5-hour version of the movie. If you haven't seen it somehow, maybe you're just too young to have, seen it yet, I definitely recommend it. This movie is a must watch. You have to watch it. You have to. That's it. That's the movie. That's the review. That's the movie review. Bye.